the energy sector has probably one of the biggest areas that you could bring to the Gen Z of saying, like, you're bringing so much value to not just this company, but honestly, to the end of the day, to the United States, when you come here and work with us.
Welcome, everyone, to the Industrial Security Podcast. My name is Nate Nelson. I'm here with Andrew Ginter, the Vice President of Industrial Security at Waterfall Security Solutions, who's going to introduce the subject and guest of our show today. Andrew, how's it going?
I'm very well, thank you, Nate. We have two guests today. Amanda Theel is the Workforce Development Group Lead at Argonne National Laboratory, and Eddy Mullins is the Project Coordinator at Argonne National Laboratory. And they're going to be talking about jobs. The official title here is Demystifying Cyber Jobs. They're focused on the energy sector, but it seems to me that a lot of what they say applies to all industries. Especially since we're talking about jobs and recruiting, and people complain, the employers complain that nobody's applying to OT cybersecurity job postings, and the people looking for jobs are complaining there are no postings, they can't find them. So, in a sense, both of these are the same problem, and this is what Amanda and Eddy are going to be talking to us about.
All right, then without further ado, here is your interview with Amanda and Eddy.
Hello, Amanda. Hello, Eddy. Thank you for joining us. Before we get started, could you maybe, give our listeners a few words about yourselves and about the good work that you're doing on the Cyberforce project at Argonne National Labs?
Sure. I'm Amanda Theel. I'm the Workforce Development Group Lead at Argonne National Laboratory, and I lead the Cyberforce program out of the Department of Energy's Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response.
And I'm Eddy Mullins. I am the project coordinator at the Argonne National Laboratory, and I work closely with Amanda. I assist in managing the Cyberforce program.
And the Cyberforce program is the collegiate workforce development effort out of the Department of Energy that looks at providing students that operational technology component of understanding how to get themselves into that energy sector job right after they get out of college.
Okay, so thanks for that. So, in my understanding, Cyberforce is training, young folk to enter the cybersecurity roles in the energy sector. I heard you folks speak at the Energy Sec conference recently. You've been running into challenges getting your graduates placed. Can you talk about some of these challenges? What are you running into here?
Sure. So the Cyberforce program hosts a handful of competitions and exercises for collegiate students to kind of better prepare themselves with cybersecurity skills and operational technology knowledge. But what we've come to really understand is that the terminology that a lot of these students learn at school, in their colleges, universities, even in their quick programs that they take, their boot camps, don't necessarily translate into the jobs that they're looking at online. And what I mean by that is the terminology that we would necessarily think in a traditional cybersecurity or cyber engineer that they're looking for in a job doesn't necessarily translate directly in a one-to-one when we get into the energy sector. They use slightly different terminology. And so these brand new people are, students or folks that are looking to go into the job market, they're not fully understanding that there's a different vocabulary that's out there. And so trying to get them to really understand that they have to be look fully into a job description, as well as understanding that their job role is not going to just be cyber when they get into an energy sector job.
Yeah, and also one of the other things that we noticed, is we looked at generation and the way that the modern generation that's getting into the workforce now, the way they look at the workforce is completely different than what if like a Gen X or a baby boomer, the millennials and the Gen Zs. When they're reading these job descriptions, there's a lot more than just the totality of what it is that they're going to be doing, that they're looking for is, they're focusing so much on what is the general experience of, and how does this job and the experience that it's describing to me, how does it fit into my life? Like our parents, when they were in the workforce, it was how do we fit to the workforce? Now it's kind of like, how does the workforce fit for us? So, we're seeing that some of these descriptions and the way that they're written in the energy sector they've been utilized for, quite some time. And they're a little bit outdated to some of the modern tactics and the modern ideals that, a current generation student would be looking for and appealing to apply.
Andrew, it seems to me that what you guys are talking about here, it's a common refrain, maybe within industrial security, but also in just about any line of work. You go to school for all these years, you learn calculus, and then you get out into the real world and you don't know how to do your taxes. Is there anything unique about how we're applying this to industrial security, this problem?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it's a widespread problem. The specific data points that Amanda and Eddy have are in the energy sector. That's what they do. But yeah, I see a lot of similarities across industries. And it's not just across industries; it's across time. I mean, I'm coming up on the end of my career now, but I remember before I started, when I graduated high school, I was going to do a sciences degree at the University of Calgary. I show up at the university and I know that to do a sciences degree, you've got to take first year calculus. And I had taken high school calculus, and the university had a program saying, look, if you've taken high school calculus, you can do a challenge exam. If you ace the challenge exam, you don't have to do the first semester of university calculus. So, I'm full of myself. I say, I got an A in high school calculus. I should be able to do this. I show up for the challenge exam, and they put the exam paper down in front of me, and I don't understand even one question. Your name goes here. I understood that part. The rest of it, no idea. 5 minutes later, studying these questions, I get up, I hand the paper, and I leave. I show up for the calculus course. 2 lectures in, I figure out that they're teaching exactly the same thing that I learned in high school, only they're using a different notation. And so I looked at these questions and didn't understand a one of them. So terminology, notation, this is stuff that, there's gaps, in this industry, there's gaps in other industries, there's gaps over time. I think this is a very common problem. Okay, so that sounds like a couple of different problems. Can we hit terminology first? Can you give us some examples? What are the gaps that students are seeing versus the industry is using?
In a lot of positions, we'll say in the energy sector, they tend to look a lot as in a generic post on either an operational security analyst or operational security engineer. And when they look at those things, they tend to think of it as operational, meaning less on the cyber side, or it's written more in a sense of it sounds like a help desk role rather than them actually working on the cyber side. And it tends to be, we'll use the word less flashy for them. So when we think through cyber, they're looking for firewalls, and they're looking for the fact that they're going to be building a secure backend. And part of that problem is, and again, it's the knowledge that some of these students lack in just the general critical infrastructure field, is that energy sector specifically has been around for obviously so long that our infrastructure has been there and it's not changing. So a lot of what we need security-wise is understanding both in a physical type as well as the IT that goes with it. But it's not just cyber, it's having a multi-hat wearing person that understands both an IT infrastructure, but also an operational infrastructure which is keeping the grid up and running, but we can't just keep the grid up and running by updating and putting updates in place or a firewall. And so they're looking for those things of, I'm going to be managing, patching, keeping the lights on for things. And it's not as clear as day for these students. And so when they don't see that in a job posting or even a job title, it tends to be less clear for them if that's actually what they're going to be doing or not. But when we talk to these organizations, that's ultimately what they'd be doing on some portions of their job. And other portions, we need them to really kind of help understand what's the next thing look like for this company? What's the next generation of energy look like in securing it? And part of that is still trying to figure out what are we calling things? What are we doing? And working through some of that.
You also mentioned sort of generational challenges. It's one thing to look at a job posting and say, yes, this is the kind of thing I've been trained for. But it's another thing to look at it and say, this is what I've been trained for. And yes, this is what I want to do. It sounded like you were saying that sort of a lot of the postings that you see out there are sort of recycling language from 10 years ago and really are not appealing to the young people that, the posting is targeting. Can you talk about that? What needs to be in these postings? And, is it just the postings, or does the nature of the job have to change somehow in order to attract this generation of workers?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. Not just the language within the posting, and also what is the experience that come with it. I mean, we all know, like, after 2020, in the modern generation, one of the biggest things that they look for is flexibility. If you look at the baby boomers, the Gen X, like, telecommuting never existed. It wasn't an expected expectation of work, where now it's almost a demanded expectation of work. And it doesn't have to do with just telecommuting or hybrid work. It's just the flexibility of hours of scheduling. We all grew up with the standard 9 to 5. That's almost kind of going into the older generation where it doesn't exist now. The modern generation is looking to be flexible on how it is that they can work. What hours do they work best at? And those are some of the things that are simply to add to a job description that can already emphasize what the job experience would be like. When they look at, as soon as they start seeing that 9 to 5, yeah, like Amanda mentioned earlier, it doesn't sound sexy. It's not appealing. And when you talk about the energy sector, automatically when you think of energy, you think the line workers, the boots on ground, where the sector in itself already doesn't have those appealing factors that would be working for a Google, an Amazon, those big tech companies. So that's how you modernize the positions and the descriptions to provide a little bit of emphasis on the benefits of life. We all know that working for the energy sector has its own benefits, and sometimes the energy sector kind of fails to emphasize those benefits of the consistency of work, those kind of things. So it's a little bit of both when it comes to just the terminology as well as the flexibility of what they're looking for.
And what we want to see is we're not emphasizing that job postings should be unrealistic either. At the end of the day, like, we understand that there's always going to be jobs that there's not much you can change in a job posting to make it sound any better. But when we start looking at the generational differences between each generation and how potentially one looks similar to another, but then what are their differences, you start to kind of notice just in the workforce alone, what does each generation really value? And at the end of the day, we look at job postings and they tend to be written a lot for the baby boomers, those that they were wanting a job, and it really didn't, I don't want to say it didn't matter what the job was, but they wanted to get in the door. They preferred structured organization at the end of the day. And so you see a lot of positions written that way. When you look at the Gen X, they started to be more flexible and wanting to really be able to see the ability to change as an opportunity grew. And so being able to see that ability to grow within an organization started to occur. But then you get to the millennials. And again, as Eddy pointed out, when they started to join the workforce, COVID hit shortly in the mix of it, and work from home started. But equally, millennials tend to be very money driven. So at the end of the day, when you do a job posting for them, they're very wanting to know what is the dollar range that they're going to be hired within. I'm again not stating that that's a good or a bad thing, but they kind of have an expectation up front of understanding where their lifestyle is within their kind of domain. And then you see Gen Z, which is kind of on almost a polar opposite spectrum. Again, not saying that they're not interested in the dollar value, but they're really more interested in understanding, like, how do they bring value to your company, but also bring value to their life. They want to make a difference. And that's a really hard way that you need to think, how can I write our job description to show someone the value that they bring to a bigger picture at the end of the day? And honestly, the energy sector has probably one of the biggest areas that you could bring to the Gen Z of saying, like, you're bringing so much value to not just this company, but honestly, to the end of the day, to the United States, when you come here and work with us. And to Eddy's point, like, the energy sector brings stability. When we think, right, just this last year, we've had a lot of those big tech companies having quite a bit of layoffs. And so when you think through energy sector companies, the like, you have more stability there. It may not be as flashy of a salary, but you have stability and you have something that brings value back to you of, I'm actually bringing power, electricity, something back to either my own house or to people that I know.
The latest numbers in the 2023 threat report on OT cyber incidents show that the threat environment has changed fundamentally at the beginning of this decade. OT cyber attacks with physical consequences have changed, from a theoretical problem to a very real problem, more than doubling every year. The new report is focused on deliberate cyber attacks in the public record. These are attacks that cause physical consequences in process industries and discrete manufacturing. Most of these attacks are ransomware, though the fraction of hacktivist attacks is growing. And the report's appendix includes a complete list of all cyber attacks since Stuxnet that meet these criteria. To see how today's OT cyber threat environment has changed, I invite you to download the report, a joint effort between Waterfall Security and the ICS Strive OT Incident Repository. You can download the report at waterfall-security.com/2023-threat-report, or just go to the resources menu at the Waterfall Security site and click on white papers and ebooks.
So I am a millennial, technically, but I'm only a few years off of Gen Z, and so I do feel the urge to defend them a bit here. I don't think that what Amanda meant is that Gen Z is, money hungry or whatever. Gen Z does put a focus on the salary numbers because I think that there's more of an idea of worker empowerment, that you don't just go and work for a company and take whatever they give you, but you vet them to make sure that they're going to give you the experience and the compensation that you deserve up front.
That's right. I mean, I have a daughter who's a millennial, and I might use the word practical. To me, it's not just saying I want to know how much money I'm going to get. It's a bigger picture of, and what does that mean for my life? Where am I going to live? Do I have to drive into work? How does it affect sort of the big picture? And to me, it's more than the generation. With each generation, to me, you've also got to look at, well, bluntly, how old is the generation, and what are they up to in a current posting? I mean, it's to me, I see the mistake here. The mistake is old guys like me put a job posting together that would appeal to me when I was fresh out of school. Yeah, well, A, I'm the wrong generation. B, I'm not fresh out of school. B, C, a lot of these folk aren't fresh out of school either. I remember when I was a young man, I bounced from job to job. The grass was always greener. And then I had my first child. And the wife looks at me and says, "You're done moving around." And I'm going, "That's for sure." And I got me a job. I settled down and I stayed there for 15 years. Why? Because I had other fish to fry. Okay, I had other priorities in life. I had other ways to spend my energy. If I had spare energy, it went into the kids, it went into the home, it went into the family, not, finding the grass is greener next job. So, there's a lot of variables here. It's not just the generation, but, where is each generation at their point in life in this kind of age group that you're trying to appeal to?
Right. And of course, the conditions that in which people are looking for jobs now are quite different. I can imagine someone in, say, your position, Andrew, who's been at the same company for 15 years or longer than that, and then they post a job for maybe the kind of entry-level job that they started off with, and they have a salary number associated with it that sounds quite good to them. But of course, houses cost a lot more relative to average salaries these days than they did before. And so what might seem like a lot to somebody of an older generation now to a younger generation, doesn't quite go as far.
Indeed. So a lot of variables to take into account. So that makes sense, but I want to push back on sort of. I heard you use the word remote work, saying that there's a generation of young folks out there that entered the workforce during or shortly before the pandemic that have become accustomed to remote work. Everyone's expecting remote work. I have to push back on that. If you are a pipe fitter in a power plant and it's your job to fix stuff that's broken and you carry a toolkit around all day, this is not something you can do remotely. Is it really true that there's a whole generation of people out there expecting to do remote work? And to me that just doesn't seem possible. Can you talk about that a bit more?
Sure. So, you're right. That's, it's definitely, I think, more what I think Eddy and I were mentioning was more definitely towards the tech field. And I think it's a benefit of tech to be able to be remote. Most jobs require you to have your computer and an internet line, and, you should be able off to the races. Most of us figured that one out, again, unfortunately, during a time in which we didn't really have many options, but to be at home, unless your job was to be in the office, which, again, not stating that some of these energy companies did require someone to still be in the office, but a lot of we'll say entry level or folks looking to come into the job market, they grew up in what was a remote environment, whether that was school, whether that was a remote job. And so they see a flexibility into them, almost a negotiation factor of that ability to be able to work from home. And so seeing the tech industry is one of those of the few, and again, I think everyone looks at that, it could be a systemic problem moving forward, and it could be a benefit dependent on where your organization is. That is definitely something that we've noticed that the younger generations look for and find as a means of want is their ability to work from, I won't even say work from home, but work from wherever they're at. Some of them, it's they want to be on vacation 365 days a year, but work from wherever that place is. And some of them is they just really enjoy working from home rather than being in an office. So they can work in, be at home in Alaska, but work for, a company on the East Coast. Whatever makes most sense for them in a comfort environment. But I agree with you that no, not every industry and not every person, understands that that's something that, is available to them.
I mean, it's kind of one of the appeals to come into the tech industry. When you think, the tech industry and you look at California and states, those big states, automatically you assume two things. One, flexibility, and two, you assume high salary. And the flexibility, especially with teleremote, is what will allow some companies to be able to gain talent outside the scope of their availability. You know, if you look at rural Arkansas and you need a cyber operator in a rural area, if you don't have that flexibility, you limit yourself on how far can somebody be from the office. Is somebody gonna be willing to drive 2 hours to go into the office? Or if you allow the teleremote, the hybrid option, you can get talent within outside the scope of driving distance, which allows you to operate slightly more efficiently. So that's what I was referring to when it comes to the flexibility in the tech industry. That's kind of one of the benefits to it.
On the subject of remote work, I have some notion that there are jobs within an industrial setting that can be done remotely. You know, maybe working at a SOC, but don't you need most people to be on premises? Like, what percentage of people are we talking about here with regards to who?
The short answer is it depends. There isn't an easy number that springs to mind. Some of the dimensions of the problem. One is criticality. If we're talking about managing small wind farms or small solar farms, a lot of that's done remotely. Why? Well, because the worst case, if you get something horribly wrong, what's the worst that can happen? The turbine turns off, the power stops coming out of 3 of your windmills. Does that affect the grid? Not really. Does it even affect your bottom line? Well, it depends how big a utility you are. If you only have 3 windmills, it's a big deal. If you have 700, nobody notices. So on the other hand, if you've got a large power plant that is feeding hospitals, it's feeding the military installations, it's a really important asset. You've got a hydroelectric dam driving it, or you've got coal-fired power plant, massive boilers and furnaces. There's more of a push in the sort of the network engineering world to make that not so accessible remotely, because all remote access is potentially a threat. It has to do with the role as well. As you pointed out, there's a lot of, if what you're doing is looking at stuff and drawing conclusions about it and sending sort of abstract information back into decision makers, like your example was a good one, the outsourced security operations center. These people generally they're not trained as incident responders. Okay, they don't log into the system and start poking around on it. They're not trained to touch the systems, but they are trained to look at the alerts and look at circumstances and decide whether something merits a deeper investigation, and then throw it over the fence with a lot of information to the incident response team. So the incident response team might have to fly out to site, but or might be hosted at the site. But not necessarily the people doing the analysis. So yeah, it's a long, fancy way of saying it depends. Imagine, though, that we had a magic wand, and we waved the magic wand, and all of a sudden, the job postings people were putting out were, speaking to the aspects of the job that appeal the most to the current generation of entry level workers, and magically. Use the terminology that resonated, with the entry-level workers, saying, yes, this is what I was trained on, this is what I'm able to do. If we fix those problems, are we done?
No, unfortunately, I don't think so just yet. What we've also tended to find, and again, I'm not nitpicking on the energy sector because I know that this is done in a lot of places, but we found that there's a use of, I'll use the word conglomerate job postings. So what I mean by that is if I'm looking for a software engineer, the job posting will be posted as a software engineer 1, 2, 3, or senior. And while that seems very open to anyone to apply, the position itself is written for the senior level. So when you read through a job description like that, it comes very unwelcoming to an entry-level person looking to apply. It doesn't provide a very clear understanding of, are you looking for multiple software engineers? Are you looking for one? Am I, as an entry-level person who's applying, going to be compared against potentially someone who is a senior level? Am I going to even have the ability to apply? And when you look at the job descriptions, a lot of the preferred experience is pretty hefty up front because, again, it's written for a senior level. And in talking to a lot of organizations, we've found that they do these in essence because it's a budget. And instead of writing out several positions, they pick whatever their max budget may be, and the job postings are written to whatever their highest level person they can hire. And then they have the discretion to hire people below that. So it's slightly concerning because if I see a software engineer senior and I'm an entry level person coming right out of college, my first thought is not to think I'm going to try to sell myself as a senior software engineer. And if I don't have contacts at that organization to even begin to ask the questions of, can I even apply for this? Is it more than one position? Do you think that there's openings for others? It leaves it to be very unopen and unwelcoming, even though at the beginning it looks like there's these 4 potential areas that could fill for me. The other thing that we've noticed is that in these conglomerate positions, sometimes just the lack of ensuring that it's very clear and not just like grammatically looking, that when we copy paste and change experience levels, suggestions, that we're being very mindful that those changes are occurring. And just similarly looking at like a software engineer 1, some of the job postings we found were like which to me would scream a very close to entry level person. People were asking for like 18 years of work or 18 months of work experience, which is, a year and a half. Otherwise, they'd take an internship experience, but equally so, then we need to make sure we're providing those opportunities out to people in the meantime.
Yeah, and one of the difficult things is that, we understand the budget limitations, but, a lot of these companies, when they're looking for succession planning, when you write a position and you have multiple levels, then competitively, you would think that the company would take the person with the highest level of experience, which is the least amount of training necessary for the person to be able to come in, do the job, like we always like to say, plug and play. But every time you look at the senior level, you have individuals with 18, 15 years plus of experience who are in the closer years, the baby boomer generation, they're closer years to retirement. And what occurs is that when you have these positions like that and all you continuously gain is high senior level members to your company, which is good at that time, you negate to have the succession planning because you're missing out on those entry level positions that are lacking the training to get to senior level. So once you start having the large numbers of retirements and people start to leave, you have no one in the bottom to fill that position in the training. So what occurs is that as your seniors start to leave, then you're starting to alter the positions to bring in entry level. Well, now you lack the senior experience to produce that training to eventually repeat the cycle. So we noticed a lot that a lot of these students, because they automatically, like Amanda was mentioned, they automatically presume they're going to be competing against a senior coming off of college, even at a high level of education, a master's or a PhD. As soon as they say experience required, a lot of students look back and say, is my education, my projects in school, any competitions, is that experience? Or is experience mean days on the job? And a lot of the times they have some experience, but they sell themselves short knowing that I would possibly be competing with somebody who has 10, 15 years plus. And companies lose a lot of modern, innovative talent because of the way these conglomerate positions are being written.
All right. So thinking about this, let me ask you a hard question. We're talking about people coming out of school or out of university into entry level positions, but a lot of the people, I mean, I go to conferences, I talk to people. A lot of the people that I talk to, a lot of people that I see in the OT security space, they did not come out of school into OT security. They came out of school with an engineering degree or some sort of technician certification. They worked 5 years and then looked around and said, let me take the next step. Let me get some skills in a new field in addition to what I've been doing for the last 5 years. Or they come out of IT, they go to school for IT or even IT cybersecurity. They get a few years experience, maybe at a help desk, maybe in a SOC, a security operations center. And then they start, stepping out of their sweet spot, getting some extra training, getting some extra experience, and moving into the OT security space. None of these are entry-level people. They've all started somewhere else. They have 5 years experience under the belt of some kind, and now they're moving into the OT space. Is there really such a thing as an entry-level OT job?
That's a really good question. It is one that's like a definite one that's super hard to just jump right into, and you definitely need the mixture of talent. I think what, at least from my point of view, and I would presume Eddy's as well, is what we're looking to push back, I think, a bit on is, wouldn't it be great that instead of having, and again, I'm not pushing back on just energy sector, I think this happens quite a bit, is organizations look to have someone else pay to build someone's skill set up and then say, I'd love for you to come work for us. But instead of harvesting that talent as young, fresh, green talent and saying, we're going to build you and we want you to stay with us, that provides a lot of people so much more hope that you have actual interest in having them grow. And so whether or not I, walking in the doors fresh out of college, know 100% anything about operational technology, if you buddy me up with the right person in your organization, whether that's an informal or formal apprenticeship, whether that's an informal or formal buddy system, internship, at the end of the day, I'm going to be more loyal to that company because they see value in me of putting forth that time and effort to grow me for their organization and seeing the point of moving me through how they want things to be done. By the time 5 years comes around, again, think people happen to do it all the time. They transfer organizations, they move, whatnot. But you're starting to already start to see what you're fixed in somewhat of your ways of how you see things, done things in other ways. And so we would love to shift the paradigm away from just saying, well, operational technology is, Bob, who's been doing it for 30 something years. Sooner or later, Bob's going to want to retire. And who are we going to look for his protege? And at what point in time do we start saying, instead of looking for the person that's been there for the last 15 years that kind of knows what Bob does when Bob goes on vacation every once in a while, why don't we start looking at the younger talent that is interested in helping and start getting them involved? They're interested in wanting to know. Equally, they have a passion to understand, how do these things break? And so instead of just saying we don't have entry level, if that answer is fully true, which I agree with you to some, aspect on that operational technology side, that's not something that we should be comfortable with actually going out and being able to say, is that there's no such thing as entry level, because even 5 years of experience in an engineering program or IT and moving over and cross training to then move into OT, technically you're still a novice. You're not, you don't know it all yet. But we just don't want to call it entry, because no one wants to take 5 years of experience and say, now you're an entry level again. So that's my push is, hopefully that at some point, we work to really start bringing in some of the younger talent and giving them that opportunity of using some of their very large brain capacities that they have to think outside of the box of how can we really secure some of our energy sector needs.
Yeah, we've all heard the saying, it's not always greener on the other side. And just like you were saying, like when you have somebody who has 5 years in a previous organization, they have a reference point and a standard of what it is that they want to do and how they want to be treated when they're doing it. So when you go from IT, you have your 5 years of experience, you're technically still kind of new now into the OT space, and you realize this is not for me, or I really like this, but I don't like the way this company does it. That's when you start having large turnover rates, and you start having a lot of people who come in, do a year, and then they want to pursue a higher salary. So you spent 1 year training a person, you made them a very good OT operator. Thank you very much. Now they went to another company to pursue another higher salary, another experience. When you take somebody who's brand new and the only experiences they have is a college dorm, and they're willing to learn because they just spent 4 years, 5 years learning, they don't have a reference of what another job should be. They don't have a reference of how this job should be. All they know is what you teach them, and all they know is that I'm here to learn it. So you'll get more time and more effort and experience from this individual who's really brand new, green off of the academia side of the house, who's going to take the time to learn something than somebody who already can learn it quicker, but ultimately say, this is not for me, I'm going to go this different path. So that's why we're kind of pushing for companies to take the chance, really what we'll call it is take the chance and understand that it can be learned, it can be taught. It's about taking the time to put them with the right mentorship and taking the effort to really get them to be what the company needs.
Cool. Well, this has been good. I've learned stuff. Before we let you go, well, let me thank you first. Thank you both for joining us. Before I let you go, can you sum up for us what should we take away from these questions, and what are next steps if we want to use the knowledge?
I hope that, again, we're obviously speaking to energy sector. That's who we work with the most, is that, we really want to be able to bring together those open job positions that we know energy sector has, and the amazing talent that we also bring from the Cyberforce program in the collegiate space, and even those that have graduated from the program that are still seeking, new employment, and be able to honestly marry the two, bringing that talent to the energy sector and be prepared. But how do we do that so that both sides are happy at the end of the day, that both understand and are open to the ideas of what, each are looking for, and understanding really the expectations going forth, in future, people and work and things that we're doing. And then also really to just understand just from generationally, and this is not just energy sector specific, but all that, we really need to stop and take a look at how are we, when we're trying to recruit and, write our positions for the next talent that we're looking for, we really need to think through like, what are the generations that we're looking for interested in? And each, senior level position could be a very different group than someone when you're looking for an entry level. And we should be working to kind of ensure we're being inclusive and writing our positions so it makes the most appropriate sense to who we're writing it for. So other than that, we'd love for people we have the Cyberforce competition. That's our main program out of the Cyberforce. That comes up here in November. We would love for people to be able to participate. That's our red-blue exercise with collegiate students. If those are interested, they can reach out on our website, and that's cyberforce.energy.gov. And we'd love to hear and see people there as soon as possible.
Andrew, that was your interview with Amanda and Eddy. Do you have any final thoughts to take us out today?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing I got out of the interview was, concrete ideas for making job postings appealing to the generation that you're recruiting, for the stage of life that generation is in. And this is something, it sounds to me like we have to, consult with our HR people. These are people who study people, not, recycle a job posting that, attracted us, the old folk, to the industry when we were that age many, many decades ago. More generally, what I got was sort of a strong sense of how important it is to hire young people. Succession planning, the energy industry has to think long term. A lot of industries have to think long term. And I'm diverging a bit, but succession planning can be tricky. That's something that sort of deserves a whole episode if we can find a guest. But let me give you sort of just a taste. I remember reading a report. This was some years ago. It was a manufacturing company. They brought in a couple of young engineers to replace, a technician who'd been with the company for 40 odd years and was approaching retirement. And these engineers just couldn't seem to keep up with the technician. They were together. They were less productive than the technician was singly. So they brought in an expert, an operations analyst, followed these people around for a couple of weeks, came back with a report and said, here's what's happening. Every time one of these engineers, anytime anybody goes to this technician and asks a question, this person reaches behind his desk, pulls down a clipboard with 79 scraps of paper on it, some of them yellow with age, flips through, answers the question and goes back to work. Get that clipboard, copy it. These are your standard operating instructions. You can't afford to have them hanging on a clipboard in one person's office. So, making things work succession-wise is important. It can be difficult, and hiring young people fresh out of school can make them more loyal. But in my opinion, look, even if people jump around, like I said, in the first 10 years of their career, the grass is always greener. They bring, people coming into an organization bring perspectives from outside the organization. If someone's leaving our business, we might be miffed, but we're probably hiring someone at that level in from another business. So, the energy industry has to think, and does think sometimes, as an industry, not just as individual enterprises. And as an industry, we have to be about hiring and training and growing young people. This is something the industry has to do. This is something that every utility in the industry has to do. And here's some concrete advice to, speed that process, especially for the entry-level folk.
Okay. Well, thank you to Amanda and Eddy for elucidating that point for us. And Andrew, thank you as always for speaking with me.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you, Nate.
This has been the Industrial Security Podcast from Waterfall. Thanks to everyone out there listening.